1460 WVOX.
Now, live from Whitney Media, 1460 WVOX, the Greenburgh Report, with Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner. You can join in the conversation at 914-636-0110. Now on 1460 WVOX, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good morning, I'm Paul Feiner, the Greenburgh Town Supervisor, and welcome. Today we have a very interesting program, and it's also timely. My guest is Sergei Glazunov, and Sergei is here from the Ukraine. He lives in Kiev, and he's in the United States trying to develop some contacts because he wants to start thinking about what happens after the war when we have to rebuild the country. So I met with Sergei at Town Hall earlier this week, and we were talking about the possibility of having communities around Westchester adopt neighborhoods and reaching out to local developers, the business community, and doing what the Ukrainian community, and doing what it takes to help get the country going again. So welcome, Sergei, and thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Feiner. And yes, we did talk a few days ago, and the suggestions that we have, I think it's absolutely brilliant, and that might and would work, I believe, for Ukraine. Well, the war is still ongoing, but I think the planning stage, it already needs to happen, and some of such initiatives have been already originating in Ukraine. Some of the countries and cities in particular are looking and declaring their interest in helping the Ukraine to reestablish and to rebuild some cities. So, for example, some countries like Greece, Italy are talking about the rebuilding of Mariupol. Gdańsk, a Polish city, also declared some interest. Dortmund Football Club said they'll rebuild the stadium in Chernihiv. United Kingdom, Hungary, saying that they'll participate in Kiev region rebuilding, and so on. Denmark, Baltic countries. A few days ago, there was a meeting between European Association of Cities and the Ukrainian Cities Association. Such towns as Warsaw, Leipzig, Tallinn, Barcelona, Oslo, Prague, they also declared their interest in rebuilding or in participating in the reconstruction. So the idea of Westchester County, one of the largest and most prominent counties in New York, to take part in this development stage, I think it's absolutely brilliant that it should work.
Right. What do you think people who want to do something to help, could be doing in terms of moving this forward? Like, what could I do as town supervisor to help you achieve this dream?
Yeah, it would be wonderful if we could initiate some contacts and some discussions in this regard, because the major goal of me being here in the United States now is to explore the opportunities and widen my network of contacts that I do have, but obviously this situation is very specific. It's not purely an investment type of project, because I think the private capital investment will come at a later stage. But now there are things that need to be done, and if with your help, with the help of local community, we could start those conversations and start.
So it's really not like investing money right now. It's basically developing the contacts, and then at some point. There may be opportunities for local businesses to help get the country back going.
Yeah, well, every initiative starts with planning, and this is probably what we need to be thinking about at the moment. Obviously, any community reconstruction, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. You cannot just build the houses and infrastructure and not reestablishing the businesses. So people that live there, they need to be employed. So these are two parallel things that need to be done. And the other way around, if you have some businesses, some workplaces, you need to have some places for people to live.
What type of business do you have in the Ukraine?
I currently manage a gas producing company. It's the fourth largest private company in Ukraine. Basically, we've been affected by the war as well. Out of our 3 production sites, we had to shut down temporarily, hopefully. 2 of them in Kharkov region just because of the close proximity to the active war actions.
Right. Was any of your plants bombed in the Ukraine?
Luckily not. They have not been bombed. We obviously did have an emergency plan that because this war was possible, expected to some extent. So we did have the plans that we had introduced the same day the war starts on February 24th. And this also includes some masking of our production side.
Right.
So
we have to take a 5-minute break,
Yep.
and then after the break, we'll be right back. And my guest is Sergei Glazunov from the Ukraine, and we'll also hear about his experiences in the war. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor.
1460 WVOX.
Now back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Hi, I'm Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh Town Supervisor, and we're talking about rebuilding the Ukraine. Although everybody's focusing on the war, there's some people who are starting to think what happens after the war, because many cities in Ukraine have been bombed, they've been destroyed, and life in the future is going to be hopefully better. My guest is Sergei Glazunov, and can you tell us a little bit about the Rebuild Ukraine effort that you're a part of? Is this are you working in conjunction with other people?
Yes, the initiative that basically have the same name, the Rebuilding Ukraine, has actually started almost immediately after the war had begun. So the corporation had been founded in March 2020, and the sole purpose of this corporation is helping Ukraine to rebuild after the Russian war. The agency it represents multiple professionals from the US, from Canada, from United Kingdom, EU, and Ukraine, who represent themselves individually as well as the financial institutions and manufacturers that they do work for. That's a combination of people with very vast experience working for Western companies, as well as having historical exposure to Ukraine with understanding of what's going on there and how to work in the country. The agency looks at the reconstruction stage from both the multi-sector perspective as well as diverse geographical orientation, so throughout the Ukraine. And in terms of the work and services that the agency is planning to provide is basically become the single window, kind of the unified point of contact with the authorities and its clients. By clients, we mean the projects that need to be conducted in Ukraine and the providers of those services and the goods for those projects to be realized. So that's the identification of the projects, the project management, the financial development, the contracting, finding all kinds of means to make those projects happening. So in terms of the kind of timeline, and this is a startup essentially, the initiative just started, but it's already equipped with the professionals and the workers to some extent. The initiative will go live in terms of the web presence and the media presence by the end of May, followed by seed financing stage. Basically, all the analysts, the interpreters, the engineers, they need to be paid eventually, so there would be this seed financing. After that, the agency will look to select probably 3 to 5 projects and approach the government and multilateral organizations like APIC, DFC, Exim banks to finance those projects right after the war ends. And these are the organizations that typically are the first to provide financing after the military activities are over. And the development station basically, meanwhile, will be building a pipeline of the other projects for the private and institutional capital.
That is great. So you're looking for contacts, people who are interested in helping out, helping to restore, the country. We have a very large Ukrainian population in Westchester. Yonkers and Greenburgh has the second largest population. Do you feel that you'll be able to get support from the local community?
Well, I hope so, and that's part of the reason of being here in the country in general, and thanks to your invitation to this radio show. So I'd like to reach out to individuals and organizations who would be potentially interested in the rebuilding phase.
That that is great. How do people contact you? Do you have an email?
Yeah, I do. So maybe I can.
Or they could email me, and then I could email.
Yeah, that's probably because typically on the air.
Right, so you don't get it. My email is pfeiner, FEINER, @greenburghny.com. I was sort of thinking there's so much destruction in Ukraine. How long do you think it's going to take until the country is functioning after the war?
Well, my understanding that probably there would be three stages after the war ends, and the first stage I would call it an emergency one, and that's also consists of two probably phases. The first one is minimizing the damage, and that's something that's going on right now. It's in terms of providing the humanitarian aid to those needed, that's food, medical supplies, and other, just making sure that the economy is preserved to the extent it's possible by relocating part of the businesses to a more safer side. And that's what's already in place. The second phase of this part is the would call it a rapid response. That the things that need to be done in order to try to just put the economy back on rails to some extent where it's possible. So this is just the emergency solutions that need to be done during the first probably 6 months after the war is done. And then the reconstruction stages, that's probably the first phase will take, I would think, probably up to 2 years. And that's a lot about continuing with a very basic infrastructure. And
I guess some of it would be like temporary
housing, the heat, the water supplies, the bridges, maybe temporary bridges just to restore logistics. Very important part of that is introduction of right policies that would make it more flexible in terms of operations and just reviving the economy. And also the introduction of the policies and and making the legislation better will build the ground for the investment phase. But the real investment phase, I think, will start probably after 18 to 24 months after the.
And how long do you think it will take to?
Well, I think it's at least 10 years, yes, but maybe more.
Right. We have to take another break, and we'll be back with Sergei Glazunov. And if you're interested in participating in an effort or learning more about the effort to rebuild Ukraine after the war, you could email me at pfeiner@greenburghny.com, and I will contact Sergei. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor.
Now back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good morning, Westchester. I'm Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh Town Supervisor. My guest is Sergei Glazunov, who is from Ukraine, and he's involved in an effort to rebuild Ukraine. And he's planning now, taking steps to plan now, because they want to be ready after the war is over. We were talking about social responsibility during the break. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Feiner. Just wanted to mention that I think the business in Ukraine for the next decade, it could not be the same way as it used to be, that just for profit, for shareholders' profit. Over the last 18 years, Ukraine has survived essentially three major shocks, and these shocks, they all had kind of the increasing slope of society distress and violence. The 2004 Orange Revolution, it was an absolutely peaceful event that resurrected Ukrainian identity, Ukrainian self-awareness, and shifted Ukraine towards the West. At the same time, the aspirations of quick positive changes, they have not materialized because the coalitions that eventually won the election basically started to get into political fights in between themselves that have not concentrated on the country much. The 2014 revolution of dignity, that's basically, people died, hunted heavenly, Crimean annexation, Russian war on Donbass, that had an effect that Ukraine was completely turned to Western democratic values, new aspirations, and strong desire to be integrated into the Western society. And since then, Ukraine achieved a lot on the international arena, but unfortunately did not do sufficient work internally. After the end of the war with Russia, I think Ukraine will have the third and, honestly, in my opinion, the last chance to do it right. And obviously, there would be a huge push to implement all the required institutional reforms, change the outdated laws, regulations, decrease corruption, so that the country becomes more investable and increase chances to be admitted to European Union or other Western blocs. However, this strict top-down approach that absolutely for sure will be implemented in terms of the regulation change, I don't think it's sufficient. The development of the country as a free democratic society and sustainable reduction of corruption and prevention from repeating old mistakes should also be built on the bottom-up basis through the local communities, local businesses that should be very significant contributors to this process. So, and this becomes not only important to the Ukrainian people and the country, but those investors who, in a way, are becoming part of the global Ukrainian projects. So, I think the supporting societies in which are struggling after the war and which the business is planning to take its activities should be imminent and important plan, a component of any business plan. So that would include employments of those people who have been relocated, those who are coming from the war, and they need not only new homes, but they also need a place to work, and that's also part of the country's security as well.
Do you think that most people are going to come back? There's so many of the residents of Ukraine have relocated, and they're refugees all over the world.
Yeah, the internal relocation is estimated at more than 10 million people, and this estimated that over 5 million people basically went abroad. But if you look now, the lines on those cross point, the border points in Ukraine are significantly larger than those that are out. So the estimate is that about probably 80% of those relocated will come back, but that's the statistics, that's the polls that basically are being conducted. And people are coming back to the towns such as Kyiv and even Kharkiv that and still is being bombarded. The Russian forces have been pushed out of the city probably by 30-40 kilometers which is within the artillery range.
And you were When did you when were you last in Ukraine?
We left probably in about a week after the war started. Just basically sitting for a few days in the kind of improvised bombshell, which is our underground parking, and then went to a friend's house and we sit in the bombshell over there. So then decided.
So scary.
Yeah, and have my 10-year-old child with me, my wife and my elderly mother. So the idea would be basically I need to take them out of there.
Has this war, Ukraine had politically is a very activist, country with people having strong feelings. This war has united the people of Ukraine. People who were political opponents are joining for it. Has that surprised you? How the country has come together?
To some extent, it was surprising, but on the other side, that's how it must have been. I mean, there was no chance, and there is no chance to sustain and the aggression and win this war without such unity. But Ukrainians, in their strong part is their self-organization and their self-assistance in such difficult situations. So that's something that Ukrainians do possess. Even though the Ukrainian genome is somewhat interesting, it's if you take any individual, so this individual is president to himself, it's a prosecutor to himself, and it's basically the advocate to himself. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just how it is. So there is this very strong sense of freedom within the society, and that's what makes it very different from our neighbor, so to speak.
Right. In the United States, when there's a development proposal, when they want to build houses, commercial buildings, there's a lengthy land use review process. When, after the war, I guess it's important to rebuild, but it's also important for the Ukraine to be beautiful and for the correct planning to take place. Are you, how is that going to work? If there's a plot of land that was destroyed, somebody wants to rebuild, do they just rebuild, or what type of approvals do they need from the government? Over the last
few years, there was a significant push into the right direction for decentralizations. Lots of decision-making, as well as the budget allocations have been given to local communities, and that's absolutely a right path, and that needs to be continued. At the same time, it makes sense to basically have some sort of logical planning, because even without that, if you look at the Kiev architecture, sometimes you see, even though it's an absolutely beautiful city, but if you look at how the houses have been built, sometimes it doesn't kind of fit the style region by region. You have very different examples of architecture. So my hope that the decisions to do things will be with community and will be as streamlined as possible. But of course,
I guess it's a balance.
Yeah. Yes.
Great. We have to take one final break, and we'll be back in a couple minutes. My guest is Sergei Glazunov, and he's involved with a group of people who want to rebuild Ukraine. They're starting to make plans now, and then when the war is over, they'll be ready, willing, and able to start the ball moving. So I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor.
WVOX.
Now back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Hi, I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor, and my guest is Sergei Glazunov. And Sergei is involved in a private effort to rebuild Ukraine. They're trying to get organized now, so after the war, they'll be able to really, proceed. So this is basically a total private effort right now, and there's a group of people who you're working with, right?
Yeah. So this is a group of essentially private individuals representing themselves or their company, even though the agency does have and expanding its relationship with the government organizations as well in the US and in Ukraine. I think next Friday there would be a meeting with some parliamentary representatives from Ukraine that will be here in US. So we'll be discussing those efforts with them as well.
That's great. Could you talk about the strategic investment?
Well, obviously, the first thing that Ukraine will need is the infrastructure rebuilding, which includes roads, bridges, the housing, the necessary things that Ukraine will have a shortage of in the beginning. If we name, just to name 5 areas of potential future kind of strategic investment, in my opinion, that I do not pretend to be kind of a economist, but from my perspective, it's logistic infrastructure, including export logistics. That's very important because essentially that needs to build from scratch. For the time being, the sea is essentially Ukraine is blocked from the sea access, and sea used to be the main route for the exports. So the logistics needs to be rebuilt. The agriculture, know that 75% of Ukrainian land is arable, and considering the total land of 600,000 square kilometers, that's very significant potential. Currently 55% of that is used, but there is a huge room to grow, and Ukraine has probably one of the best quality soils in the world. I think the very important part will be what is called as a new energy economy, and this is a very wide spectrum of things, beginning from energy efficiency to the green energy, and such niche thing like natural resource mining for components that go into the new energy economy, such as copper, lithium, scandium, nickel, titan, graphite. So this is all these minerals Ukraine has in significant quantities. Sort of the exception to that, but I think it will be very much important for short to mid-term, is the gas production. So with the attempt to get complete independence on the Russia from gas production perspective, it's something that I think will be very much developing in the Ukraine, and Ukraine has very significant gas resources, estimates about 1 trillion cubic meters of conventional gas reserves, with current production at about 20 billion. So this is something to look at. And probably, I would say, the metals and mining reconstruction, because it will include some of the plants have built total loss, like in Mariupol, some have been affected to a large extent, like in Zaporizhia and so on. Because from kind of the export orientation perspective of the country, the structure is remaining relatively uncertain, mainly because the kind of geopolitical choice that Ukraine has to make and will be allowed to make. Because obviously one option is integration with EU, European Union. Ukraine has the aspirations to get into this bloc. However, the other road is the formation of East European bloc with countries like Poland, Baltic countries, maybe supported by the UK and Turkey, with some other countries joining. So depending on this landscape, I think that will basically draw the landscape of the Ukraine export orientation, therefore the opportunities for investment into such projects.
Right. The other question, that I had is if we have listeners who are developers, businesses in, Westchester, and they want to get involved, what type of involvement will the Ukrainian community accept from, say, a Westchester, business? Will they be able to actually, do work in the Ukraine, or do the Ukrainian people want to rebuild the country on their own?
Ukrainian people are very open to any type of communication, collaboration, and
so this could be really, for a Westchester business, this could really be an opportunity after the war.
I think it might be. It's important that the initiatives are properly organized, that there is a proper governance on those initiatives from the investor side. So that's very important. So
you were talking earlier on about making sure that it's done with integrity, and I guess anytime there's money involved, there's always room for corruption and all that. So there has to be some controls also?
Yes, absolutely. So the controls need to be built on the investor side with also proper controls and mechanisms that are being delegated towards Ukraine. But that's an absolutely important part of it for the initiative, for the global initiative forward, because one or two bad examples could spoil the whole process.
Right. Do you feel that right now this effort is being coordinated from the private sector? At some point, will the government be much more involved, and when does when does there have to be sort of like a more coordination?
Well, the government is starting to get involved. There are some initiatives that are being organized, like U24. Basically, this is the funding that is being collected for the reconstruction. But I think these are parallel initiatives. So there would be a number of streams that will be built at the government or state levels and down there to the private or individual levels. And that's how it basically works now in the humanitarian activities, and probably there will be the same type of layers in the investment activities as well. So it's not necessarily to mix the private with the government. It just makes sure that there is a communication. But
right. Do you have any gut feeling how much longer this war is going to go on?
I wish I could say it ends today, but really not clear. There are some estimates, some analytical reports on that. Some are saying that the very active phase will end by the end of the year, but there are also projections on the kind of slow developing conflict. So,
and do you think that there's going to be any compromises at the end of the day, or do you think that the Ukrainian people are going to insist on keeping the whole country?
Well, the peace talks that have been declared and that are ongoing with various degree of intensity, I think that they're important because, that's all about saving lives. Every day of war, that's lives lost. So the peace talks, they should go. My personal opinion is that I do not really believe that that will get anywhere soon from that perspective, because unless some black swan event happens, because really I don't think Russia will change its objective, and the objective is kind of this neo-empirical desire to bring Ukraine under control, and that's what Ukrainian people
are going to fight. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, but I want to thank you for joining us, and good luck with your efforts, and I look forward to trying to reach out to the Westchester community to help rebuild Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Feiner, for having me here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.